Well, President Trump slammed the royal body, and he did so in typical Trump style, in words and actions likely never seen here before. He also dealt with some of the global issues that our planet faces. He called for abolishing biological weapons, and he also vowed that Iran would never get a nuclear bomb. But what will likely be most remembered from his speech was his bluntly calling out the international diplomats to their faces, faulting the UN for failing to end wars and stopping illegal immigration.
It's time to end the failed experiment of open borders. You have to end it now. Sid, I can tell you, I'm really good at this stuff. Your countries are going to hell. In America, we've taken bold action to swiftly shut down uncontrolled migration.
As we expected, the mainstream media will react to his speech negatively, but we know who the president is. He's a person who's going to call it what it is. He's going to tell it to your face, and that's exactly what he did to these individuals at the UN, these world leaders. Now, he went on to Truth Social after this speech and said this: "It was a great honor to speak before the United Nations. I believe the speech was very well received. It focused very much on energy, migration, immigration. I've been talking about this for a long period of time, and this forum was the absolute best from the standpoint of making these two important statements. I hope everybody gets to watch it. The teleprompter was broken and the escalator came to a sudden halt as we were riding up to the podium, but both of these events probably made the speech more interesting than it would have been otherwise. It is always an honor to speak at the United Nations, even if their equipment is somewhat faulty. Make America great again." And so that's one of the criticisms you'll hear from mainstream media, is that the president was complaining about the teleprompter and the escalator. And, you know, I think they missed the entire point of the speech. And just to give you an idea of how important it was, here's one of the things that he said, which is that the United Nations were never helpful in bringing wars to an end. Take a listen.
I didn't think of it at the time because I was too busy working to save millions of lives. That is the saving and stopping of these wars. But later I realized that the United Nations wasn't there for us. They weren't there. I thought of it really after the fact, not during these negotiations, which were not easy. That being the case, what is the purpose of the United Nations? The UN has such tremendous potential. I've always said it. It has such tremendous, tremendous potential, but it's not even coming close to living up to that potential. For the most part, at least for now, all they seem to do is write a really strongly worded letter and then never follow that letter up. It's empty words, and empty words don't solve war. The only thing that solves war and wars is action.
So I think the president made two good, solid points. And this is something that mainstream media does not want to give any attention to. Number one, okay, the president's patience with the United Nations has run out. Why is that? Because they do nothing, literally. Okay, did you know that 22% of the financial budget for the United Nations is funded by American taxpayers? So yes, the president is fed up. Point number two, when it comes time for them to take action, whether that is ending wars or assisting in ending wars or assisting in preventing wars, they're nowhere to be found. This happened twice. One of the biggest indictments is Russia invading Ukraine twice. The UN, nowhere to be found, except on some letters where they threaten Russia but never follow through. So I think the president is right in the way that he confronted these world leaders. Now, I believe that, but MSDNC has a totally different perspective about what happened. I want you to pay attention to the language that they use.
Over the course of that 56 minutes, you heard the president there do a great deal of self-promotion and the pushing of American nationalism, saying, I have the highest poll numbers I've ever had. I'm right about everything. We are the hottest country in the world and no other country is even close. That he had built the greatest economy in the history of the world in his first term. And this time it's even bigger and better. He suggested he should receive the Nobel Peace Prize. He also made it clear that his global relationships are predicated on one very key thing, quote, I only do business with people I like. He blasted repeatedly the very global institution to which he just spoke, noting that the escalator he rode on with his wife, First Lady Melania Trump, stopped halfway up on his way to the General Assembly Hall. He noted repeatedly the bad teleprompter that stopped working, was on and off again. He noted that years ago, he should have been the one awarded the contract to renovate the UN headquarters, and that the other contractor ultimately produced a far inferior product. And he then asked, quote, what is the purpose of the United Nations? It has such potential, not coming even close. He also boasted about the U.S.'s right to nuclear weapons, but not others that he suggested pose threats. Notably, Iran, which is a member of the United Nations, he noted that many of Iran's military commanders at the hands of the United States, a great many of them are now dead, and that they no longer pose a nuclear threat.
So what we have here is MSNBC continuing to do the thing that makes people not watch them to begin with. What do I mean by that? They need to learn from the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court just sticks to the merits of the case. They blew right past the merits of what the president was saying and only focused on the words that he was using from a more personal point of view, meaning they used the words like boastful, right, or self-promotion. They didn't even bother to consider, why has the UN that we have been funding so much money, they haven't done anything? Why is that? Why is it that they only send letters but never follow through? See, they don't want to talk about that. They only want to talk about the president. And again, that's why they've lost all credibility, in my opinion. Now, here is Marco Rubio earlier this morning on Fox and Friends, I think making the case about what's wrong with the United Nations and what they really should be focused on. Take a listen.
Well, I think one of the things the president's going to have to address and is going to address is the UN itself. And that is, why do we still have a UN? It has tremendous potential. The UN is an organization that has the potential to do some great things around the world, but it's not doing it. If you look at Russia and Ukraine, you have a war going on there. It's the president that's been carrying the burden of trying to bring it to an end. The UN is playing no role. The U.S. is asking for the UN to step up and play a very important role. We have a lot of support, but it looks like China might stand in the way of this effort to bring that about. The UN will play.
The president put them on notice, called them out for their hypocrisy, let people know that the United Nations is really doing nothing. So the real question here is, what purpose do they serve? And why are we funding them so much money? We make up 22% of their budget. I just think that is crazy. But what's actually crazier than that is a terror plot that was dismantled by the Secret Service moments before Trump's speech actually took off. And I think we should hear a little bit more about it, because this is frightening. Take a listen.
Meanwhile, this story breaking only minutes ago. Secret Service has identified and dismantled a massive threat near the United Nations. The agency found what's described as a hidden telecom network consisting of thousands of illicit servers and SIM cards. Investigators say it could have blacked out cell service, jammed 911 calls, and plunged the entire city into chaos. And we've been warned about this for some time, Dana.
Yeah, Fox team coverage. Lucas Tomlinson is live outside the UN with a preview of the president's address. But first, CB Cotton has the details from our New York newsroom. Good morning, CB.
Good morning, Dana. Yeah, the Secret Service says this telecom threat was uncovered as agents investigated telephone threats directed towards U.S. government officials. The investigation led them to a chilling plot that, yes, could have crippled New York City's phone lines, data networks, even emergency channels, with world leaders now here in New York City for the United Nations General Assembly. The investigation began this spring, and agents raided multiple locations within 35 minutes of the UN, seizing hundreds of servers and more than 100,000 SIM cards, tools capable of blasting out 30 million anonymous texts per minute, enough to flood and shut down critical systems.
There's a lot of this that actually takes place in the background of our everyday lives, because the average American isn't really paying attention to anything except what's going on in their lives, right? So people like the Secret Service, the FBI, et cetera, all these agencies, they're constantly stopping these terror plots from actually taking place. And this one finally was announced publicly. But there's so many situations like that that are never announced publicly. So,
you know, he's actually right about this. I worked downtown. I was a correction officer for 17 years. And I worked in downtown Manhattan. And we received so many threats. You know, in our institution, people calling up the control room, claiming that they were going to bomb it, they were going to do this, they were going to do that it was absolutely ridiculous. And why would you want to bomb a correction institution, you know? But these are the things that go on all around, especially in New York City. And the thing about the UN is that it's right on the water. So they have all kinds of protective detail over there when the delegates, when the president, people come in from different countries. They have boat patrols. They even have something close to like, it looks like a warship with like submachine guns on there. I mean, all kinds of things, helicopters. They close down the airspace, as they should, and they close down part of the East Side Highway, and you think about New York with billions of people living there, and just New York is one of those fast-paced places. If you've never been there, but you've watched TV, it's like always crowded, so people are coming and going and they don't have time to stop. So just the inconvenience of having everything shut down, the streets around it causes, just crazy chaos. So we found out that there was another plot against the president, okay? And you would think that with all of these plots, with this guy Ruth just being convicted for trying to kill the president, I think that was the third time, that they would stop some of these outlets from, calling him Nazi and Hitler and all of this kind of stuff. You just had Charlie Kirk assassinated. All of this rhetoric has to stop.
Hats off to the Secret Service for obviously doing their job and really sticking to what makes them great, which I always found to be the biggest indictment against the Secret Service, is getting too much into the DEI stuff and becoming too political. Just stick to preventing things like this from happening. And so this is obviously bad and great news at the same time, right? Because this was in New York. Now, more to this story continues. Take a listen.
The special agent in charge of New York City's field office sharing the potential danger this telecom network posed.
Encrypted, anonymous, which means that it could theoretically text the entire nation in 12 minutes. So that's problematic. Not to mention all the other things, taking out cell towers, denying services, and criminal organizations and foreign governments using it to run their organizations.
Agents stress there's no sign that the UN General Assembly itself was targeted, but the Secret Service says early findings show that some of the seized SIM cards are tied to foreign actors and criminals already known to federal law enforcement.
Definitely nation state, foreign governments communicating over that network to known criminals in the United States and known organized crime, known cartels, and terrorist groups were using this network to run their communications anonymously and encrypted.
The feds say now forensic work is underway to find out who stood behind this network and whether similar threats lurk elsewhere.
There's no question that similar threats are in existence. We know what happened under the Biden administration, how many people crossed the border, even people who are on the top 10 most wanted list from the FBI as far as terrorists are concerned. So there's plenty of threats coming down the pipeline. And my hope is that they'll stay away from politics and focus on keeping America safe. And I'm more confident than ever, if we're comparing it to the Biden administration, that they will actually be able to do that. Now, speaking of what's going to keep America safe and, getting away from woke policies and things that are destructive to this country, this takes us to our second story, which is Kamala Harris. She's been making this book tour, as you guys know, because this book tells all secrets about what happened as she was vice president, including the presidential election. And that's why it's titled 107 Days. Now, the only reason why I'm even going to talk about this story is because there are two main points that I find to be the most entertaining. One has to do with her vice presidential pick, which was Tim Walz, but it should have been Pete Buttigieg. And then the second, the comment she made about the president. Now, before we get to all of that, let's hear a summary of what's going on here. Take a listen.
This is also happening today. Former Vice President Kamala Harris ramping up her criticism of Joe Biden and fellow Democrats during her book tour. But she's also doing some second guessing by partially blaming herself for Biden's decision to seek re-election.
I can only take responsibility for myself. And on reflection, you know, and I talk about it in the context of asking a question of myself, was that grace to not bring it up to him, or was it reckless? And on my part, I do reflect on that and feel that there was a recklessness about not raising it with him. I talk about what was going through my head, right? And what was going through my head to not bring it up was that it would come off as being very self-serving, and therefore maybe lack the credibility that it deserved. But I do think about it. I do think about it. And I also say, though, and I speak extensively about this, my concern about him running for re-election was completely separate from my admiration and knowledge about his capacity to serve as president of the United States.
She lacked credibility because she refused to separate herself from President Biden at the time. I mean, that's just as clear as day. Anybody could see that coming a mile away. But, you know, she felt the need to stay loyal to him, and that actually hurt her more than it helped her, in my opinion, especially when you see her crying about the president in this book. So it just doesn't make any sense why she never separated from him. But I don't even think that's really the story here, because I think we know exactly what happened there. The story is the fact that she was picked as vice president from Joe Biden himself because she was a woman and a woman of color. That's his words, okay? Not my opinion, his words. So when it's her turn to pick a vice president, she said her first pick was Pete Buttigieg, but she didn't feel the country was ready for a gay vice president. Now, let's hear her try to explain the logic behind this. Take a look.
I guess I'd ask you to just elaborate on that a little bit. It's hard to hear. Yeah. With you running as, you know, you're the first woman elected vice president. You're a Black woman and a South Asian woman elected to that high office, very nearly elected president. To say that he couldn't be on the ticket effectively because he was gay, it's hard to hear.
No, that's not what I said. That he couldn't be on the ticket because he is gay. My point, as I write in the book, is that I was clear that in 107 days, in one of the most hotly contested elections for president of the United States, against someone like Donald Trump, who knows no floor, to be a Black woman running for president of the United States, and as a vice presidential running mate, a gay man, with the stakes being so high, it made me very sad, but I also realized it would be a real risk. No matter how, you know, I've been an advocate and an ally of the LGBT community my entire life. So it wasn't about, yeah, right. So it wasn't about any prejudice on my part, but
that
we had such a short period of time, and the stakes were so high.
All right, so let me just translate it for you. So Rachel Maddow, who's married to a woman, so she is gay, by the way, just asked her point blank, hey, listen, so you didn't pick Pete Buttigieg because he was gay or what? And Kamala Harris, being who she is, which is Mrs. Word Salad, she says, well, no, I didn't pick him because he was gay. I didn't pick him because I was running on short time and I was running against Donald Trump, and that the stakes were so high, and the fact that the country wasn't ready, and ultimately because he was gay. I mean, what are we, stupid? But this is who she's always been. I mean, she's just a terrible candidate. There's no question about it.
And I just don't understand. Whenever she goes into an interview, she puts her foot in her mouth, right? Do you guys remember the interview that she had with The View? And they asked her, is there anything that you would have done differently than Joe Biden? They gave her an out. They gave her soft questions. She could have mentioned, you know, all of his failed policies and gone the other way. That's a simple thing to do. But she goes, no, I wouldn't have done anything different. So the fact that this country is failing, and you were the vice president with him for 4 years, the border czar, right? And you let over 50 million people into the country within those 4 years. And they ask you if you would have done something different, and you had an opportunity to say that you would have, you fumbled that. Can you imagine her in a meeting with like a Vladimir Putin?
Now, I want you to hear what Will Cain had to say on Fox News in response to Kamala Harris's book and this overall tour that she's on. Take a listen.
Yeah, I think Kamala Harris is trying to thread a needle that's impossible to thread. She's trying to recover some sense of long incinerated credibility. The American public knows how far everyone involved in that, White House and the Democrat Party, went to cover up the frailty, the failures of Joe Biden. So now she has to admit that obvious and try to recapture, again, some long lost credibility. But along the way, she's doing the one thing that she cannot do if she wants to ever run for president, and that is to throw the rest of Democrats under the bus. She's burning relationships, and that party is not one that is made from the ground up. It's not starting with the people, with the voters. It starts with the apparatus, and she seems to be burning every relationship within that apparatus, I think ensuring she is not a serious candidate as a Democrat in 2028.
Yeah, see, what Will Cain is actually touching on, and I'm going to take it a step further. The reason why she's coming out and doing this is because she doesn't care anymore. Now, why is that? Because she is resentful and she is disappointed and angry. Now, why is that? Because it's the very thing that conservatives have been warning progressives this entire time. Do not pick people based on DEI. Mm-hmm. If you were to read her book, she goes throughout this entire situation saying how she was minimized, how she was minimized, how she was muzzled, silenced. Okay, why? Because they didn't look at you as someone who truly was a great vice president. They looked at you as just a woman who was picked because of her gender and her skin color. It's human psychology. She's a victim of DEI from a positive point of view because she became the vice president, but from a negative point of view because of how she was treated after the fact. I just find that dynamic to be interesting. I mean, it just really pokes a hole in these people's logic, but let's just stick to the numbers. I think the better question at this point is, how do Americans feel about Kamala Harris at this point? And that's what CNN touched on this morning. Take a look.
I would just say that if you want a messenger to go against Donald Trump, you can do far better as Democrats than Kamala Harris. What are we talking about here? Well, let's take a look at her net favorable ratings nationwide. You know, back in October of 2024, she was at -5 points. Not exactly great, but pretty close to the zero mark, right? Pretty close to even. But now, down under she goes. She's at -13 points. That's an 8-point drop. Since the general election among the overall electorate, she is not well liked at this particular point. The American people, they don't want this. They don't want her. And get this, she's 37 points underwater with independents. If you can't win independents, you can't win the election. And the bottom line is, with those in the center of the electorate, those who are the most up for grabs, she is way, way, way underwater.
I love the way he did the deep dive. Like now she's deep under, way under the extra circles. He's like really emphasizing there is absolutely no way you are coming back. And this is CNN.
Definitely swim with the fishes.
Well, listen, we know why she's underwater and why she will continue to be underwater, just like the entire Democrat Party is, because 99% of what comes out of their mouth are complaints. All they do is make everything about the president, and they don't make it about the average American who has to wake up in the morning, live paycheck to paycheck, figure out how they're going to live their lives because of this new economic reality, which is the cost of living has skyrocketed over the past 4 years. So, you know, this is just politics 101. The messaging is totally off. And just to give you guys an example of how off it is, by the way, this is who she is, okay? She makes everything about the president. Everything is Donald Trump's fault. And she didn't hesitate to do that during her interview with Rachel Maddow. Take a look.
And right now we are dealing with, as I called him at my speech on the ellipse, a tyrant. We used to compare the strength of our democracy to communist dictators. That's what we're dealing with right now in Donald Trump. And these titans of industry are not speaking up. And perhaps it is because
I am so tired of them. Where is the FCC and stuff like this? Tyrants, they just say anything on these networks and they're able to get away with it. I don't understand it. Do they need to get sued? Didn't they get sued before by Donald Trump? Or let me know in the comments.
His threats and the way he has used the weight of the federal government to take out vengeance on his critics is something that they fear, and I get that. I understand why they do. We've seen the demonstration of it.
Okay, so you heard it. Donald Trump is a tyrant. He's a communist dictator. And the fact of the matter is, number one, she doesn't even know what a communist dictator is because she's never lived in communism, okay? She never grew up in a communist country. And so when people say these things, I always find it a little ignorant because you don't even have firsthand experience in that. But fine, free speech. She can say whatever she wants. Here's the deal. And this is the same situation with her not picking Pete Buttigieg. She doesn't follow her own logic. Right. So she calls the president a communist dictator, but in the same interview has no problem supporting Zoran Mondani, who is, happily being coined the socialist Democrat for New York City mayor. She has no problem supporting him. Take a listen.
Arguably the fastest rising star right now in Democratic politics is Zoran Mondani, who is going to be elected mayor of New York City, and probably in a landslide if the polls are anything to go by. Lots of mainline Democrats have been very shy about his candidacy. They seem somewhat flummoxed by his success. As a sort of talent spotter in the Democratic Party, what do you think of him and his candidacy? And what do you think of mainline Democratic shyness and agitation about the prospect that he's going to win?
Look, as far as I'm concerned, he's the Democratic nominee and he should be supported.
Do you endorse his candidacy?
I support the Democrat in the race. Sure.
All right. So bottom line is this. Kamala Harris is out there going on this book tour, continuing to humiliate herself, in my opinion. She has not changed one bit. In fact, she's just become much more angrier, and clearly she's resentful from the presidential election. And a lot of that is targeted at Democrats. And so I think they're going to have a lot to chew on here. And it's just another distraction for that party. No question about it. But I think to sum up this story, let's just take a look at how people of California feel about her potentially running for president, because I think that tells you the full story of where she is at politically. Take a listen.
Let's talk about her home state, which is obviously a state that is a Democratic state. How are they feeling about Kamala Harris?
Yeah, okay, so voters nationwide ain't liking what they're seeing from Kamala Harris. Democrats are far more open to other options for 2028. But how about in the home state? Well, it's pretty much says the exact same story. Californians on Harris's runs for president. Back in 2024, she got 58% of that vote. Now, only 42% of Californians are excited for another run for Kamala Harris for president. So no matter where you look, whether you look nationally among voters overall, nationally with Democrats, or within her home state, Kamala Harris's political standing has fallen. Now, obviously, we'll see whether or not this book has any big changes. But at this particular point, Kamala Harris's political career, time seems to be running out.
Yeah, not only has her time run out, in my opinion, but I am with Stephen A. Smith on this and many others. Her political career is over. There's no question about it. I mean, she's burning all bridges with this book. Now, let's go to our next story, because this whole Jimmy Kimmel situation is continuing to get interesting. So as you guys know, ABC Disney did cave, and they're going to air his show tonight. However, the affiliates, Sinclair, and now just moments ago, Nexstar, they still refuse to air his shows. And I think this is just shaping up to be truly entertaining. So why don't we take a look at this story now?
Despite Disney's decision to reinstate Jimmy Kimmel Live tonight, ABC's largest affiliate owner, Sinclair, and now Nexstar, have decided they are not airing tonight's show. Nexstar says it'll continue preempting the show until they see change. Quote, "We stand by that decision pending assurance that all parties are committed to fostering an environment of respectful, constructive dialogue in the markets we serve." Nexstar owns 28 ABC affiliates, including in large markets Nashville, Salt Lake City, and New Orleans. This comes after Sinclair yesterday said it still won't air Kimmel on its 40 ABC affiliates, including in Washington, D.C.
And honestly, ABC should have done the same thing. They should have made sure that Jimmy Kimmel's respectful in his dialogue. I used to watch Jimmy Kimmel, late night. I would cut him on. I liked Guillermo, But then ever since the election and before the election, just everything Donald Trump does, we don't cut you on to hear that. We cut you on to hear comedy, to hear little funny stuff, watch little skits and stuff. We don't want to hear that. And that's all I started getting from him.
Seattle, Portland, and St. Louis. Sinclair says it's replacing the show with news programming as it continues discussions with ABC.
Now, because of these recent developments, I think it's safe to say that both sides were wrong in their analysis, including myself. I really believe it was just due to the ratings, and this was a great excuse for his show to be pulled off air. And I was wrong. And people on the left are wrong when they said that the government was canceling him and that this was a First Amendment right that was being violated. And of course, that's not true, because if that was the case, then Disney would have never released a letter that said we only did it because of the timing and the comments that he made. And then we also stood by our decision because we got the inclination that he wasn't even going to apologize. So, and in fact, he wasn't even going to apologize. He was just going to double down. And so because Disney came out and said that, I think both sides were actually wrong in our reactions, and that's fine. I mean, it's always speculation at best. I'm sure you guys understand that. And that's why I encourage you guys to make up your own mind. I just want to show you what both sides are saying. Now, let's get into the nuts and bolts of his contract, because MSNBC definitely makes a good point about this. And I think it tells you the full story of what's going on here. Take a listen.
I mean, I want to point out that his contract is up in May of 2026. He had said a few years ago when he re-signed that he was quietly quitting. You could imagine that he's not going to want to now feel as though he cannot be himself on the air and that he's constantly in fear of losing his show. But at the same time, you have these affiliate owners, Sinclair and Nexstar, who are not going to be airing Jimmy Kimmel tonight just because Disney's putting him back on the air. They are still going to preempt his show in their local markets.
So we assume they'll be listening to hear what he has to say, because didn't Sinclair at one point say if he apologizes, maybe we'll reconsider?
That's the thing. You had Sinclair, who owns several of these ABC affiliate stations, on us say that under no uncertain terms would they bring him back unless he issued this groveling apology to Charlie Kirk's family and also made a donation to Kirk's organization. So there are a multitude of things that Kimmel could say tonight. I mean, I had somebody float earlier that what if he says, I can't do this show anymore in fear of constantly being censored. But he also has dozens of people that work for him, that have bills to pay, families to feed. And it's not just about Jimmy Kimmel. And obviously there are all these business deals behind the scene for Disney. They need the government's approval. Bob Iger, who runs Disney, with his deal ESPN and the NFL. Then he's also trying to merge Hulu, his streamer, with another company that's worth billions of dollars. So they need the administration also to be on their good side in a way as well.
To criticize the president for that dynamic or his administration, I think is being disingenuous, because let's go back to the Biden administration and how they treated Elon Musk and Tesla. I mean, it was like a boycott. Why? Because they didn't like him. They didn't get along with him. So there's always that dynamic, no matter what administration is in charge. But just circling back on his fears of being censored. Listen, it's like what Bill O'Reilly said yesterday when he spoke with Piers Morgan. The only people that are truly being censored in this country are conservatives, especially when you're talking about cable TV and these liberal stations, ABC, CBS, NBC. You never find conservatives on there. And we're not even just talking about politics, music, actors, authors, etc. So I don't care or feel sorry for Jimmy Kimmel. He'll be just fine, okay? Nobody is censoring him. He got suspended. Censoring would be, hey, this show will be canceled effective immediately, and you will not return back on air because you said X, Y, or Z. That is what happened to conservatives. That is not what happened to Jimmy Kimmel. And you know what's interesting? It's Disney who really caved to him at the end of the day.
The decision to air Jimmy Kimmel Live again was reportedly made by Disney CEO Bob Iger after the company says it spent the last few days having, quote, thoughtful conversations with Jimmy after he made those controversial comments about Charlie Kirk's assassination. In a statement, Disney explained for the first time why it suspended Kimmel. Quote, last Wednesday, we made the decision to suspend production on the show to avoid further inflaming a tense situation at an emotional moment for our country. It is a decision we made because we felt some of the comments were ill-timed. and thus insensitive. It is not clear whether Kimmel will apologize tonight, but Sinclair is demanding Kimmel issue a direct apology to the Kirk family and to make a meaningful personal donation to the family and Turning Point USA. Harris, Charlie Kirk's Turning Point USA, is applauding Sinclair's demand for accountability. Disney's decision comes amid pressure from the left. Everything from boycotts to condemnations from the Screen Actors Guild and the ACLU.
Okay, listen, bottom line is, in a perfect world, Jimmy Kimmel would offer an apology to Charlie Kirk's family and donate money to their foundation because that's the right thing to do. That is the human thing to do as far as love is concerned. And I think that's why we're here on this planet, to express more of that and not hate. But something tells me that's not going to happen. And what's fascinating about him crying about censorship, including Democrats, is what just came out as breaking news moments ago from the House GOP. They have Google admitting censorship happened under the Biden administration, and now they promise to end bans on YouTube accounts of thousands of Americans who were censored for political speech. Listen, this is just huge. I'm going to read you the 5 bullet points that they released. Google also admitted the following to the House Judiciary Committee. Number 1, that the Biden administration pressured Google to censor Americans and remove content that did not violate YouTube's policies. Number 2, the Biden administration's censorship pressure was unacceptable and wrong. Number 3, public debate should never come at the expense of relying authorities. Number 4, the company will never use third-party fact checkers. And number 5, Europe's censorship laws target American companies and threaten American speech, including the removal of lawful content. What does this actually mean, and why does this matter? Because this is proof from Google, an American company, admitting that the federal government under Biden administration censored and banned conservatives off the platform, YouTube, even though it didn't violate YouTube's policies. You following? But Democrats cried that speech is under attack and that Jimmy Kimmel was canceled. No, this was true cancellation, where people were doing YouTube every day, making money, doing what they love to do, and then that all came to a screeching halt. And they were never allowed to get back onto the platform. So we'll see, because I think the bottom line here, and really my questions are, number 1, will the algorithm change and help people who have opinions politically thrive on both sides, by the way? And 2, who really is going to be held accountable in all this?
I was just censored on Facebook. And didn't Mark Zuckerberg meet with Trump and say that he wasn't going to censor anymore, that he too was forced under the Biden administration to censor people's accounts and blah, blah, blah. I mean, there were times I would try to post, and I don't curse. I'm a Christian, right? So I don't curse. I don't, get up there and say all kinds of crazy stuff. I just tell the truth. And I would find that people would be able to post the most egregious stuff to me and say just crazy things, under my posts and comments. And when I would attempt to respond, they would just disappear. So yeah, let's see what actually happens. And so many doctors, you remember during that whole jab thing with the jab, a lot of doctors were taken off of different platforms. They were banned and unalived.
Because obviously something was done wrong. A crime was committed. Will someone actually be held accountable? And it's really these tech companies that continue to get away with this stuff. It's just fascinating. All right, so now let's hear from you guys in the comment section to these stories that we talked about in today's video, starting with the terror plot that was dismantled by the Secret Service. I mean, that is just crazy that was even possible. And then what do you think about the president's speech to the UN? Did you believe it was self-centered, or did you believe it was the brutal truth that they needed to hear? The other question I want you to answer is Kamala Harris. We know she's done politically, no question about it. But are you now seeing in real time how bad DEI can get, even for someone who was the vice president of the United States? And then let's not talk about Pete Buttigieg, right? She didn't pick him because he was gay. I wonder how that works. And then let's go to the final story, which was in regards to Jimmy Kimmel and how they were crying about censorship. Clearly, he wasn't censored because he's back on air. And the local affiliates are staying firm in their decision to not bring his stuff back on air in their areas, of course. And then finally, what do you make of YouTube and their censorship finally admitting it?
So guys, let me know what you think in the comments about the UN speech. Did any of you watch it? If you didn't, you need to check it out. Trump actually spoke to the UN about the things that the UN is tasked to do. The UN is supposed to be a place where delegates from all around the world meet, they discuss all of their plans for their nations, and they work towards peace, towards bringing food, shelter, all of these different things for people around the earth. And NATO is supposed to be an arm of the United Nations. But here it is, they go about doing other things as well. I don't know if you guys heard about the USAID and finding out that some of these children under USAID and with NATO enforcement were part of trafficking and all kinds of things. So you let me know in the comments what you think about that, what you think about the UN. Fun fact, the UN is actually considered international property. Even though it's in New York on Manhattan Island, it's not considered part of the United States. It's an international building. It's an international property. They have their own police force. The police from New York City are not allowed to go in. And of course, diplomats have diplomatic status, so they can go about New York and do whatever they want and not get charged with anything. But again, let me know what you think about Trump's speech, what you think about Kamala and her book tour, about her issue with Buttigieg not being running for president because, or picking him as a candidate, right? A vice presidential candidate because he was gay and America wasn't ready for that. But she is big on pumping up DEI. Let me know what you think in the comments and make sure you like and subscribe and check out Devori Darkins. He has an awesome podcast. All right. Thanks for watching and I'll see you on the next one. Bye-bye.